So our case today is the murder of Chandra Levy, a 24-year-old intern living and working in Washington, D.C. in 2001 who was tragically murdered, and whose case many believe is still really devoid of justice.
She's Sarah.
She's Harley, and we're gaveling in another session of Crime in Congress. Chandra Levy was originally born in 1977 in Cleveland, Ohio, to Robert and Susan Levy. The couple originally met at the Ohio State University and shared a love for all things spiritual and religious. To that end, Chandra was actually named after a Hindu demigod, which I think is actually pretty cool. The family later ended up moving to Modesto, California for Robert's work. He was an oncologist, a trade in high demand in the area. As a child, Chandra was exposed to all corners of the world as she traveled with her family. They often went on international trips from Machu Picchu to Tanzania to Jerusalem. And as she grew up, Chandra became more independent with set goals for the future. And her exposure to different cultures made her more understanding to a variety of viewpoints. So much so that she was often brought in to help mediate student disagreements in high school. Also in high school, Chandra volunteered as a police explorer, where she essentially interned for her local police department, doing admin work, plus she also got to go on some ride-alongs. Chandra was really proud of this work and often even wore her police uniform to school despite any teasing from other students.
I love her already. That's adorable.
Me too. So for undergrad, Chandra attended San Francisco State University and graduated with a degree in criminal justice with dreams of joining the CIA or the FBI. To make that dream a reality, she applied for and was admitted to one of the top programs in the nation for those who wanted a career in public service, the University of Southern California School of Policy, Planning, and Development. During her time at grad school, she racked up a pretty great resume, interning for then Mayor of Los Angeles, Richard Riordan, and then went on to intern for Governor Gray Davis in Sacramento. And finally, in the summer of 2000, she announced to her friends and family that she would be spending her final semester of school interning in Washington, D.C. for the Federal Bureau of Prisons and their Public Affairs Division.
I remember when I got my first DC internship, I was so excited. Also, shout out Public Affairs. What are internships like at the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
Well, like many interns in D.C., Chandra's job was to answer the phones and respond to queries from the public. Her supervisor and spokesperson for the Bureau, Dan Dunes, at the time, was really impressed by her work ethic, especially as she dealt with an influx of calls regarding the execution of none other than Timothy McVeigh, who was convicted for the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. Despite that grim subject matter that she was dealing with on the job, Chandra had simply fallen in love with the city. She had a swanky apartment in the DuPont Circle neighborhood, just 3 blocks off of Connecticut Avenue. And for my DC folks, Chandra lived about an 8-minute walk from South House in Decades.
I might be exposing myself here as living in Nova, but I always thought of that as a safe area. I have a feeling you're about to change my mind.
I think all of DC is around the same general. Crime is rampant in DC. But anyways, from the outside, it seems like her time in DC is a success. That is, until she mysteriously disappears on Tuesday, May 1st, 2001. Okay, so let's zoom into Chandra's last months and days before she disappeared. Investigators end up finding out from one of Chandra's DC friends and fellow USC alum Robert Kirkjohn, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, that Chandra had received an extension for her internship. Because again, remember, it was only supposed to last for the first of fall semester, right? But along the way, Robert said, a female supervisor terminated Chandra's position after she, quote unquote, violated a strict chain of command within the agency by going around a supervisor and asking for a raise from the personnel department. Now, I tried to find more on this and couldn't, but it does give us some insight into why Chandra was still in DC in the spring. But whatever exactly the situation was there, according to her parents, the plan was for Chandra to move out of her DC apartment and come home to California just in time for her graduation from USC on Friday, May 11th, which leads us to an email that Chandra sent her landlord on Saturday, April 28th, 2001. 13 days before she is due to graduate at USC. Chandra emails her landlord saying, "It looks like my plans have suddenly changed. I was just informed this week that my job appointment time is up, so I'm out of work now. I'm going back to California for my graduation during the week of May 8th, and I'll be moving back there for good. I haven't heard from other jobs that I applied for yet, and I have a feeling that it will at least be a few weeks for me to hear back from any of them. I don't really think it would be worth it for me to stay in DC now, since I have no job or school to keep me busy here. I would like to vacate the apartment on May 5th or 6th if possible. ... I really hate giving up the apartment, but I think I need to be in California for a while to figure out what my next move is. So to circle back on her job situation, whatever the situation was with her internship extension and finding a new job, bottom line, it's April, she's out of an internship, and she hasn't found a job yet. So she's moving back to California to figure out her next move. 3 days later, on Tuesday, May 1st, Chandra would log into her laptop, going from visiting sites like the Drudge Report, National Geographic, Amtrak, and Southwest Airlines. She also sends an email to Susan, her mother, with flight fares, and then eventually ends up looking up trails at Rock Creek Park. For those unfamiliar with DC, Rock Creek Park is a city park spanning about 1,700 acres in the middle of DC. To give you an image about how big that really is, Rock Creek Park is actually twice as big as New York City's Central Park and is 81% forested. So it truly is this kind of space of wilderness in the middle of a big city where it's easy to get out of the hustle and bustle and kind of escape into the nature.
Let's recap real quick. On Saturday, she emails her landlord saying she has to suddenly move for a job or just to move back home?
Just to move back home.
Okay, so she has to suddenly move back home. 3 days later, on Tuesday, she's clearly arranging her travel back home, which tracks with the email. And then after that, starts looking at trails near Rock Creek Park. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Which I think makes total sense. I mean, sometimes you gotta take a break from packing and go on a walk and touch some grass.
Absolutely.
So back in California, Chandra's parents are starting to get seriously worried when they haven't heard from Chandra in about a week. So now this is Sunday, May 6th. Remember, Chandra told her landlord that she wanted to move out May 5th or 6th and was supposed to graduate in California on May 11th. So not only was it weird for her parents not to hear from Chandra for a week generally, but it was especially bizarre with her due to be moving back across the country.
Yeah, I would be worried too.
So on Sunday, May 6th, Robert Levy, Chandra's father, decided to call the police in DC to report Chandra missing. A squad car is sent to her apartment, and the manager there opens the door and lets the officers take a peek. What they see is 2 open suitcases, Chandra's wallet, and her other personal items scattered about. Essentially, it looks like in the middle of packing that Chandra just up and left her apartment. The officer ends up leaving his card and instructions for Chandra to give him a call when she got home. But that's all that happens for that day. Meanwhile, in California, Chandra's parents are also going through her phone bill that they pay for, so they have access to. They see a reoccurring number and decide to give it a call, and it turns out to be the office of Congressman Gary Condon, the Democrat that represented Modesto at the time, their hometown.
Why was she calling Gary Condon's office? Was she just a concerned constituent?
That's the question her parents want to know the answer to as well. So Robert, Chandra's father, grabs his handy-dandy copy of the Yellow Pages and he calls the Condons up. Condon's wife actually answers and tells him that Condon's not home, but she'll pass along the message, yada yada. A little later, who calls the Levy's home but Congressman Gary Condon himself? Now Condon says, oh yeah, no, I've met Chandra here in the office and I gave her some career advice, but I don't know her well and I have no idea where she could be. I'll make some calls to the police, though, down there in DC, but I'm so sorry I just can't be that helpful. Robert and Susan know something is off immediately. But, okay, pause. Who is Gary Condon and why is Chandra calling his office so much? So again, Gary Condon is the Levy's hometown congressman. He was first elected to Congress in 1989 in a special election and was re-elected 5 more times pretty easily. Reputation-wise, Condon was a conservative Democrat who was willing to reach across the aisle. Condon was actually, fun fact, a founding member of the Blue Dogs Coalition. And he also separated from the party to vote against Clinton's stimulus package and then later voted for Bush's budget and tax cut package. Quite frankly, people like that about him, his willingness to reach across the aisle. And it gave him a status boost, especially amongst the Bush folks as well. So when Condon met Chandra, he was really at the peak of his career.
How did they meet?
The two met in fall of 2000 when Chandra was a fresh intern in DC. Chandra had accompanied her USC friend to Condon's office in the Rayburn House office building, who wanted to get some career advice. The friend did. Condit welcomed the two, gave them a full tour, and then offered an internship on the spot to Chandra's friend. A few days later, Chandra goes back to visit her friend, now working in Condit's office, and winds up talking to the congressman. And after that conversation, they end up exchanging phone numbers and email addresses. Wild. And this is the start of Chandra and Gary's relationship, and then what turns into be their affair.
I don't like anything about this.
Me either. It's bad news bears. Now, of course, Condit is married, so his relationship with Chandra has to be super secret. To dodge questions, Chandra tells at least one friend that she's dating an FBI agent, and to Robert. Remember, this is the USC friend I mentioned earlier who had told investigators about Chandra's internship extension situation. Well, Chandra actually admits to Robert that she is dating a member of Congress, but won't tell him his party or his state. She tells him that at, guess where she tells him it?
I don't even want to know.
Bush's inaugural ball.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, Chandra had received 2 tickets to this esteemed event from Mr. Gary Condit himself and had opted to take along her friend Robert with her.
I mean, I guess that's a perk of the relationship.
Yeah, I am a little jealous, I will say. Chandra, take me.
There are other ways to get to the inaugural ball.
So
We don't
true.
need to go this route.
So true. But Chandra does tell the full story to her aunt, Linda Zamsky. Chandra first tells her aunt about her affair with the congressman Thanksgiving 2000, but it was not until April 2001 that Chandra lets Condit's name slip. Chandra expresses her love for Condit and insisted that he would eventually leave his wife, his career, and settle down with Chandra one day. But of course, it had to be kept a secret in the meantime.
And she's using the word love. That's kind of breaking my heart already.
I know. It's bad. So the last time Chandra and Condit chat with each other is over the phone on Sunday, April 29th. So this is one day after she sends the email to her landlord about moving out. So when Condit doesn't hear from Chandra over the next few days, he ends up leaving 2 messages on her home answering machine. The last of which, he asks if Chandra has left town already and to call him when she's back in California. That voicemail was left on May 3rd, so 2 days after Chandra does her internet search of Rock Creek Park and vanishes. So that's May 1st when she vanishes. 3 days later, on May 6th, we circle back to when Robert Levy goes through his yellow pages and calls the Condits up. And remember, when Condit does talk to Robert, Condit denies knowing Chandra really at all.
What a coward.
I know. Now, by the next day, so Monday, May 7th, the investigation is getting started. Law enforcement calls up Condit, and Condit tells them the same story he told to Robert Levy, that he didn't really know her, met her once, gave her some career advice, right? Investigators aren't exactly sold on that story, and they schedule a face-to-face statement with Condit for May 9th at Condit's condominium in Adams Morgan. Now, during this interview, Condit ends up admitting that Chandra had visited his apartment and spent the night on a couple occasions. And then the investigators go, naturally, so were you too intimate? And Gary says, well, I don't think we need to go there, and you can infer what you want with that.
We're inferring a lot there, Gary.
Yeah. So the next day, the police get a search warrant for Chandra's apartment. So the mistakes in this investigation, especially in the very beginning, are truly frustrating. First off, the police missed their window to obtain the video surveillance from Chandra's apartment building, despite visiting there 3 times before the 7 days in which the videotape is recorded over. So we have 0 footage of Chandra leaving her apartment to tell us if she was with someone or even what she was wearing. Second, the sergeant on the scene who tries to obtain her internet search history was not adequately trained and accidentally corrupted the hard drive, so it would be weeks before the federal agents could retrieve those last searches, which really direct where she was headed next. Now, once law enforcement infers that Chandra likely went to Rock Creek Park based on her last internet searches, they decide to do a search of the park, naturally. But once again, a major mistake is made. It's unclear exactly how this miscommunication occurred, but the order comes down to only search 100 yards off of the roads that run through the park, not the paths or the trails. So police end up canvassing a much smaller section of the park overall than was originally intended, and they find nothing in that search. Remember this later on. The other mistake, I believe, and perhaps this is a hindsight is 2020 type of deal, police really zero in on Condit as the main suspect. And don't get me wrong, this guy is definitely the worst. Like, over the course of the investigation, we find out that Condit is a repeat offender when it comes to extramarital affairs. We have one woman in San Francisco who had been entangled in a secret affair with Condon from about 1993 to 1996. And then we have another woman named Anna Marie who actually goes public with her own affair with Gary that was happening, get this, simultaneously as Gary and Chandra's relationship. And the pattern's the same all around. Gary had very strict rules that these women had to follow in order to maintain their relationship with him. The first woman I mentioned relayed that Condon would lecture her about being loyal to him, the Gaul, and that she had to deny any relationship with him to others. And then, when they would go out in public together, she had to wear a baseball cap. In my mind, not very slick, but I guess you do what you have to do, right? I don't know.
I guess if you're having an affair with a married man, that makes sense, but not liking this.
Right. But anyways, Condon ends up doing about 4 interviews with law enforcement, and he consents to a search of his apartment and even gives his DNA sample, which, by the way, is a match to a semen stain found on a pair of underwear in Chandra's apartment. So, affair, intimacy, confirmed.
Our inferences were correct.
Exactly. But by the final interview, and this is really heartbreaking to me, FBI agent Brad Garrett came away with the sense that Condon simply didn't care enough about Chandra to have any involvement in her murder. Which, again, just really broke my heart because Chandra obviously did have such a loyalty towards him and was in love with him.
I mean, it's good news that he didn't do it, but what an ass.
Yeah. Now, I'm not going to talk about Condon for very much longer, but I do think this part is a little funny. I will acknowledge that Condon tries to salvage what is left of his decimated political career by doing an interview with Connie Chung on ABC's Primetime Thursday. Don't know why his communications team decided to do this, but they did. This interview, shockingly, ends up being an absolute dumpster fire for Condon. And he actually ended up losing his Democratic primary to his former chief of staff by 18 points.
Ouch. Mm-hmm. But deserved.
Yes, exactly. That ABC interview aired August 23rd, 2001, so about 4 months after Chandra goes missing. And for that whole summer, Chandra's name and case is everywhere on the news without a lot of progress from law enforcement. And less than a month later, all that media attention that had been directed toward the Chandra Levy case all of a sudden gets directed towards the September 11th attacks and the aftermath that followed that.
I'm actually really surprised that Condon was able to get away without doing an interview for 4 months. That alone seems like a feat. I guess being gone for the summer probably helped.
Right, that's true. Just days after the September 11th attacks, the U.S. Attorney's Office gets a call about an inmate named Ingmar Guandike who has confessed to have murdering Chandra to his buddy in the clink, Raymond Alvarez. Alvarez said that in addition to confessing that he had murdered Chandra, Guandike also said that Condon had paid him to do it. And interestingly enough, Guandike was in jail for attacking 2 women in, get this, Rock Creek Park.
We need to learn more about this man.
So a little bit about Ingmar Guandike. Guandike came to the U.S. illegally in 2000 from El Salvador in search of a fresh start. He ends up in D.C. where his friend who helped him cross the border also lived. But life is really tough. Guandike doesn't speak much English, work is hard to find and is inconsistent, and he ends up spending the little money he does have on alcohol and drugs and starts becoming violent towards his then girlfriend. This is when he starts spending a lot of time in Rock Creek Park.
That is such a red flag, even without all of the other truly horrible things we already know about this man.
Right. So on May 14th, 2001, this is the same month Chandra disappeared just a couple weeks later, right? Hallie Schilling goes for a jog in Rock Creek Park, and she saw this man sitting on a curb in the parking lot watching her, and although she's weirded out by it, she dismisses it and goes on her run. I've done the same thing before, right? While jogging, though, she could tell that a man was jogging behind her and gaining on her, so she tried to speed up and then slow down to lose him, but to no avail. The man gains on her again and then grabs her from behind. Schilling sees that it's the same man from the parking lot, and this time he has a knife. Fortunately, Schilling had taken self-defense classes and manages to escape and make it to the park police station. The officers do a search of the park, but they don't find the man. Oddly, Schilling reported that the man did not try to take her Walkman or her engagement ring.
That means his motive likely wasn't robbery.
On July 1st, 2 months after Chandra disappeared, Christy Weingan was jogging with her fiancé in Rock Creek Park. Her fiancé pulls ahead, per usual, and Christy ends up alone on the trail. All of a sudden, someone grabs her from behind and pulls her down from the trail into a ravine. The man had covered her mouth so she couldn't scream and held a knife to her throat. Chrissy fights for her life and manages to escape. She thought the man wanted to rape her or kill her or both. But again, he didn't try to grab her engagement ring or rob her in any way.
I'm sure that's the last time her fiancé pulled ahead.
I hope so. So Higham does make it to the park police station, and she gives a report of the man, and the park police do a search of the park, and unlike before, they find the described Hispanic man in baggy shorts, a t-shirt, and sneakers covered in dirt and leaves still in the park. He is identified as Ingmar Guandike. Guandike ends up telling the police that both of these incidents were accidents. He had bumped into these women, tried to help them, and they screamed, and he ran away. On a hunch, though, the park police also show Guandike a photo of Chandra Levy with the thought that maybe he also was connected to Chandra's disappearance. Interestingly enough, Guandike admits to have seen Chandra in the park, and when asked if she was attractive, he said yes. Somehow, this information was not captured in a report or passed along to the DC police.
Wait, he placed himself in the park with Chandra? And this was only, 2 months after her disappearance?
Only 2 months. So Guandike ends up going to jail for the 2 assaults, and while he's there, remember, he allegedly confesses to murdering Chandra to his buddy Raymond Alvarez. So in light of this information, the police do a polygraph on both Alvarez and Guandike. Now, this is kind of tricky, to be honest. First of all, we know that polygraphs are not admissible in court because they're too unreliable. But second, both polygraphs required a translator. So the results indicated that Alvarez was deceptive when it came to the questions, did Guandike tell you that he stabbed Chandra Levy? And did Guandike tell you that he received $25,000 from a congressman for stabbing Chandra Levy? Guandike's results were originally said to be inconclusive, but then officially marked as not deceptive when asked if he was involved or had caused Chandra's disappearance. That investigation kind of just drops there in the meantime. They don't really have anything to go on.
Right, no physical evidence, and this seems like a shaky confession at best.
And I'll also note that a court-appointed psychologist found that Guandike scored very low on his intelligence assessment and determined that he suffered from a major mental disorder that had caused him to swing from very depressed to elated and also experience hallucinations and delusional beliefs.
So I'm not going to put much stock in these polygraphs between the translator and then the intelligence assessment. Seems like we have better ways of figuring out if he's guilty or not.
Yeah, investigators feel the kind of same way. So on the 2 assault charges, again, these are for Higham and Schilling, the 2 women who were assaulted in Rock Creek Park. Guandike pleads out and is sentenced to 10 years in federal prison in September of 2001, 5 months after Chandra goes missing. Let's fast forward to May 22nd, 2002. It's been just over a year since Chandra was missing. And bone collector, I'm not here to judge anyone's hobbies, Philip Palmer was on a walk with his dog off trail in Rock Creek Park when he, can you imagine, stumbles across a human skull.
I mean, I guess if you're a bone collector, that's kind of what you're out looking for?
Yes, I think Philip was probably looking for animal skulls and not human skulls.
Yeah, fair.
Either way, Philip does the right thing and he calls the police immediately.
We like Philip.
He's great. And when the police arrive on scene, they find scattered bones, a radio cassette player, and pieces of clothing. A black thong, red sports bra, black workout pants turned inside out with a leg knotted at the bottom, odd, and a gray t-shirt with text that read, property of USC Athletics. The DC medical examiner quickly identified the remains with Chandra's dental records. The skeletal remains belonged to Chandra Levy.
I'm now remembering that thing you told me to remember earlier on about an early misstep.
Right. So the find that these are Chandra Levy's remains is heartbreaking enough, but even more heartbreaking is the fact that Chandra's remains would likely have been found over a year earlier if the police had searched 100 yards off the trail. So like I said earlier, the search order from the police kind of got botched and the police only ended up searching 100 yards off the roads that ran through the park and not the paths or trails. Well, if the police had done the search right initially, they likely would have found Chandra's remains, which were just 79 yards below the Western Ridge Trail at Rock Creek Park.
It's insane to me, too, that after the reports of women being attacked on the trails, they didn't at least go back and take another look.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure what the whole issue was. I mean, I guess like September 11th attacks got in the mix as well, but initially, why wouldn't you either? Because those attacks were only a month or 2 months after. I'm not sure. Regardless, her death was ruled a homicide, but the cause of death remained undetermined. There were no bullet holes or stab marks on her bones and no fractures to her skull. Investigators did discover a damaged hyoid bone, which can indicate if a victim was strangled. But again, there wasn't enough evidence to say whether that was her cause of death or if the bone was broken by an animal or something like that in kind of that year of being out there in the woods. Going back to police blunders in the case, the Levys actually hired their own private detectives to go back over the scene where Chandra's remains were found after the police do their search. And when excavating this crime scene, the private detectives found Chandra's left tibia, the second largest bone in the body, that police had somehow missed in their initial search. Police go back and do another search and end up finding more bones that they had missed, including Chandra's femur. This bone was found about 170 feet from the crime scene.
How does that even happen?
Right? I mean, the police believe that her bones were scattered by woodland creatures in the park, but again, you gotta do a thorough search, right?
Right. I mean, scattered, sure, but they weren't a mile away.
Right, exactly.
They were within a few feet.
And we're talking femur.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Huge bones. So this find and Chandra's remains being found kind of gets Chandra's name back in the news, and it doesn't take too long for the press and the police to seriously start investigating this perhaps connection between Chandra Levy and Igmar Gwandike. And if I'm gonna be honest, it's pretty circumstantial. So law enforcement does have a geographic profiler come in named Ken Rosmo, and he notes that the crime scene, so this is the crime scene in Rock Creek Park where Christy and Hallie were attacked, and then also where Chandra's remains were found. He found that, all these crime scenes were isolated near a ravine or an embankment and within kind of a densely forested area. Also worth noting that there were no similar attacks on women before Chandra's disappearance on May 1st or after Gwandike's arrest on July 1st. In addition, Gwandike also lived in a neighborhood that bordered the park.
So circumstantial, but pretty strong evidence, in my opinion.
To add on to that, Gwandike missed work on May 1st. So again, this is the day that Chandra disappears, and was seen by his landlady with a busted lip, a bloody eye, and scratches on his neck. He said that he got into a fight with his then girlfriend, but the landlady knew that they were already separated at the time. And of course, there's this jailhouse informant confession, but that's really it. And again, the case goes quiet. Again, this is 2002.
And we do know that he has a history of abuse with his girlfriend, and so that's not totally out of the question, even though they were broken up.
Yeah, seriously, long track record of violence towards women. But again, all this is circumstantial. They just don't have enough to, indict him. So it's not until the Washington Post publishes a series entitled Who Killed Chandra Levy in 2008, so 6 years after Chandra's remains were found, that new life gets breathed into this case. And the police decide, okay, we're ramping up our efforts and we're going to resolve the case once and for all. This time, detectives actually travel to interview Gwandike in California, where he is serving the remaining time for his 2 assaults. They interview Gwandike and they see that he has a chest tattoo of a naked woman with long black hair that kind of resembles Chandra. And then they also find a picture of Chandra in his cell that he has clipped from a magazine. So very odd. And then during the interview, the police get his DNA, and Gwandike gives this kind of incriminating statement like, so what if I did touch her? But really, that's all they get from that.
That's not shady at all.
The police also finally go back and re-interview Weingam and Schilling about their assault at Rock Creek Park, which again was done in 2008, basically 6 years after Gwandike is sentenced for the assaults and Chandra's remains are found.
So wait, it took them 6 years to even interview these women specifically in reference to this case, even though they showed Gwandike Chandra's photo day 1, almost minute 1, and he confirmed that he'd seen her.
Correct, but remember, that whole bit never got written in a report, and it never got given to DC police or any other investigators on the case. Crazy.
Crazy.
The police also go back and interview multiple witnesses that had claimed Gwandike had told them that he had murdered a woman in a big park or had murdered a young woman, some story or another, right? So with all this information, in May 2009, Gwandike was indicted for the murder of Chandra Levy, and he pled not guilty in DC's Superior Court.
Of course he did.
Mm-hmm. So the trial begins October 2010, and a major linchpin in the prosecution's case is the testimony of their witness, Armando Morales, who shared a cell with Guandique in a Kentucky prison. Morales testified that Guandique had confided in him that he had killed Chandra while trying to rob her, but did not rape her. The reason Guandique confessed to this, according to Morales, was that Guandique was worried about potential inmate violence towards rapists in prison.
Interesting that he said robbery was the motive when none of her stuff was taken.
Right. The defense, on the other hand, relied on the fact that there was no physical evidence linking Guandique to Chandra, which is true. The defense also brings up this narrative of a potential third suspect that perhaps could have been connected to Condent, and their reasoning behind this rests on the fact that there was another DNA sample from an unknown man on Chandra's stretchy pants that could not be linked to Guandique or Condent. However, prosecutors and investigators, they contend that this DNA likely came from a crime scene technician, is just not relevant to this case at all.
And also, there's so much time that's not accounted for in this story. She easily could have seen another friend, or that could have been from something completely irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly. In the end, the defense is not enough, and the jury convicts Guandique on 2 counts of first-degree murder, and the D.C. Superior Court judge sentences Guandique to 60 years in prison on February 11th, 2011, when Guandique is 29 years old.
I'm glad this man is off the streets, but I'm surprised they could get a conviction without any physical evidence.
Well, the story doesn't stop there. Over the following years, Guandique's attorneys continue to challenge the conviction. You see, it turns out that the prosecution's star witness, remember Morales, had actually perjured himself on the stand. He had denied being a jailhouse informant in the past, but that was a lie. Not only had he been an informant in the past, he was also regarded as an untrustworthy one. In addition, the defense presents this new witness, a neighbor of Chandra's who had called 911 at 4:37 a.m. the last day that Chandra was alive and reported hearing blood-curdling screams, perhaps coming from Chandra Levy's apartment.
What? That changes everything.
Absolutely. But again, I want to emphasize here that the main issue is that Morales perjured himself. And this was uncovered after his neighbor/friend turned in a secret recording to law enforcement where Morales confessed to lying on the stand. In light of this bombshell, Guandique's conviction was overturned after prosecutors dropped their opposition to the defense's request to have a new jury hear the case. But with their star witness's credibility shot to bits, and the already very circumstantial nature of this case, the prosecutors announced that they would not proceed with the case against Guandique and would instead seek to have him deported, which he was in 2017.
What did Chandra's parents think of all this?
Yeah, funny you ask. Chandra's mother, Susan Levy, told reporters that she was glad to see Guandique deported. But as reported by the Modesto Bee, the newspaper in Modesto, Susan remained unsure whether Guandique was the true perpetrator of her daughter's murder, while Chandra's father, Robert Levy, was sure that Guandique was guilty. And that's really the non-conclusion to this case. Chandra's parents, her family, and loved ones remained without a real sense of justice served, without a convicted killer behind bars. However, I will leave you with one quote from Chandra's mother, Susan. She said, "As horrendous as this story is, I think our daughter would want us to educate people, to go on living and go on enjoying life. I think that's what she would want us to do."
It's impressive that her mom's even able to try to find some sort of happiness or spin on this. I'm sure Chandra would have wanted that, but it's so tragic, and her and her family deserved so much better.
Yeah, and researching this case, I really was struck by how, amazing and proactive and lovely her parents were, and really do wish the best. Also want to shout out that a lot of this material I got for this recording was from the book Finding Chandra by Scott Higham and Sarah Horwitz, which are Washington Post investigative reporters who followed the case extensively.
And we can link all those sources in the show notes.
Yes, of course. And that's the case of Chandra Levy. Harley, do you want to gavel us out?